In 1928, a young man from Scarborough wrote to Delius asking if he could help the ailing composer with the ideas for his final works. In our 20 Minutes feature, you can hear that story in a short play entitled A Late Lark, an adaptation of Eric Fenby's 1936 memoir, Delius as I Knew Him.
Youth is a strange time, and the stuff of youth is stranger. For some, youth is the playtime of life. For others, youth is a gradual and painful awakening to the sense of our heritage. We turn from one conflicting philosophy to another in our pathetic attempts to solve for ourselves the tremendous problem of good and evil. Puzzled and perplexed, we learn the world's way until, hopelessly disillusioned, we are left with our shattered ideals. Yet there is one thing the world with all its rottenness cannot take from us, and that is the deep and abiding joy and consolation perpetuating great music. Here the spirit may find home and relief when all else fails. It offers an open sesame to a world of contentment such as naught can offer in this brief sojourn here, until at last we shall be brought into the presence of that eternal light which loves and smiles. It was in such a mood of intense gratitude for all the loveliness Frederick Delius had brought into my life that I first wrote to him, in the hope that it might give him pleasure to know that his music had meant so much in the life of a very young man. I had known on first hearing it that the music of this man was no ordinary music. It had moved me so strangely and unaccountably. When at last, after weeks of inquiries and disappointments, I was able to peruse the vocal score of his massive life, I had stood spellbound in the little music shop as I read that soul-stirring and original passage for solo contralto which reads, "O Zarathustra, beyond good and evil, found we our island and our green meadow, we two alone. Therefore must we be friendly to each other. O Zarathustra, thou art not faithful enough to me." I knew nothing of Nietzsche. It was the music that struck me to the heart, so I could scarcely think of anything else for days. Thus, by the merest chance, on my first handling a Delius score, I stumbled on the very pages that contain the musical pith of all the composer had to say. I had not expected to receive any acknowledgement of my letter, and was greatly surprised to hear from Delius as follows. Grez-sur-Loing, Bouron, France, 9th June 1928. My dear young friend, your sympathetic and appreciative letter gave me the greatest pleasure.
I'm always glad when I hear that my music appeals to the young. I know Scarborough quite well. When a schoolboy, I used to spend my summer holidays at Filey, and my memories of all the happy days on that coast are still very green. With warm greetings, I remain sincerely yours, Frederick Delius.
About this time, I had read several articles on Delius and his music, and had learnt of his unhappy plight, that he was now blind and paralysed and unable to work anymore. But the real tragedy of it all was to hear that the composer was worried and unhappy because it was physically impossible for him to continue and finish his life's work. To be a genius, and to have something beautiful in you and not be able to rid yourself of it because you could no longer see your score paper and no longer hold your pen, well, the thought was unbearable. During the next few weeks, the conceit that I could help became an obsession. It chased me like some hound of heaven. Finally, it conquered me, and, getting up in the middle of the night, I took pen to paper and wrote to Delius offering my help for 3 or 4 years. I would do anything to be the means of his finishing that music. I told no one, and waited anxiously for his reply. It came.
Dear Mr. Fenby, I'm greatly touched by your kind and sympathetic letter, and I should love to accept your offer. Come here by all means, as soon as you can, and see if you like it before deciding anything. How old are you? You know, this is a lovely spot, just a quiet little village, and our house is in a big garden going down to the river. But of course, we live very much alone. Perhaps the best way for you to come would be to travel from London to Bouron, where we will have you fetched if we know when to expect you. With kind regards from my wife, I am yours sincerely, Frederick Delius.
The last letter from Grez before my departure read,
Dear Mr. Fenby, my husband was very pleased with your letter. I hope your journey will not be delayed, as we are expecting our great friend Balfour Gardiner on the 20th, and he is anxious to play an arrangement of a Delius work with you, which he has made. You would have to copy out your part from his manuscript, so you see, your kind help will be required at once. With kind regards from us both, also to your parents. Yours sincerely, Yelka Delius. P.S. I will meet you in Bouron.
It had rained all night, and when the train steamed into the long and straggling station of the lazy little village of Bouron that October morning, there seemed to be no duller place on earth. It was still drizzling when I alighted, and I looked about me for some friendly recognition. Mrs. Delius, I presume? I saw that she was surprised, and this, I afterwards learnt, was due to my absurdly young appearance.
Mr. Fenby, this is a pleasure. I am so delighted that you have come out here to help my husband. We both appreciate your kindness very much. If only you can work together in some way, it will be so good for him, better than all the medicines in the world. And it is the dream of my life that he will be able to compose again.
We entered the village, which seemed none too clean, all grey and depressing, and zigzagging our way through the narrow streets, we finally halted outside the rambling house, which was to be my home for the greater part of 6 years. We climbed the stairs up to the music room, and, pausing in the doorway, Mrs. Delius said,
This is the room where Delius has written all his finest music.
I entered the room with reverence. Immediately I felt the atmosphere was somewhat sinister, and I was curiously ill at ease. I never fully overcame that unpleasant feeling in the music room. Sometimes, when I've been hundreds of miles away, I've suddenly remembered it and shuddered.
Look, Mr. Fenby, this is your room through here. I hope you will be comfortable. I will go and tell Delius that you are here, and will call you when he is ready.
I was now left alone. A full-sized monk frowned down at me from over the bed, dark with suicide, and over the head was a framed photograph of Nietzsche. Over by the window to the garden was a clever little sketch of a shrieking goblin. It was all so strange that I wondered whether I should have nightmares that night. But I longed to see Delius, and was happy, though a little nervous, when at last I stood hesitating on the doorstep of the living room which led from the porch.
Come in, Fenby. I'm very glad to meet you.
Nothing can ever dim the memory of that first meeting. There was Delius, gaunt, deathly pale, his fine classical head proud and erect as he sat upright in his chair. It seemed wrong to shake hands, but a glance from Mrs. Delius reassured me. I took the long tapering fingers in mine and said something like, Well, sir, this is a very great honour. I'm very proud and privileged to come here, and it's very good of you to receive me so kindly. It distressed me deeply to see a man in such pain, and more than once the sight of it drove me from the room. Such was his agony. At such times, and it was so often towards sunset, Delius would suddenly become restless and uneasy, now wanting a thick rug over his legs, now a thin one, now no rug at all. Perhaps he would feel more comfortable with his feet off the ground. No, he had more relief with them on the chair. Were his feet touching? Were his legs straight? After half an hour or so of these preliminaries, the pains in his legs would gradually intensify until his ravings became pitiful. Finally he would give in, and with difficulty and reluctance be carried off to bed. One evening after supper, Delius surprised me by saying that he had an idea in mind, a simple little tune, and that he wanted me to take it down. I took paper and pen and waited eagerly. I had no idea what he would do, whether he would sing or call out the names of the notes and their varying time values. What he did was to stagger and confound me so utterly that I did not recover for the rest of that night.
Ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta, hold it. Ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, hold it. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, hold it. Have you got that? Now sing it.
But Delius, what key is it in?
A minor.
It was obvious that he failed to understand how I could be so stupid. When I suggested that it would help me if he called out the names of the notes, he gave a great sigh and added,
Well, all right then. A, B, C, B, D, E, F sharp, A, D, B, hold it.
I quickly sketched the shape of this melody, but had no idea of the stresses nor even the time signature. I was too flurried, too nervous to go about it in the proper way. My pen flopped about in my inky fingers, and the tears that I'd been fighting to keep back now blurred my spectacles, until in the end the sight and sound of it were too much for me, and I broke down. Just then Mrs. Delius entered the room, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't go on. Please excuse me. I got up and went out into the porch, and groped my way in the pitch darkness out into the garden.
Yelka, that boy is no good. He's too slow. He cannot even take down a simple melody.
I slept very little that night, for it now seemed that my mission was a complete fiasco.
Eric, is that you? I want you to write down this new opening for the new work. Bring your score paper and sit beside me. I want you to imagine that we're sitting on the cliffs in the heather looking out over the sea. The sustained chords of the high strings suggest the clear sky and the stillness and calmness of the sea. 7/4 in a bar, 4 and 3, divided strings, chord of D major, A, D, F sharp, doubled at the octave, lowest note, the A string of the violas. Dovetailed violin parts and mark the score lento molto, and each note pianissimo. Hold the chord for 2 bars. I want a semiquaver run up in tones in the solo flute from top D to A. That suggests a seagull gliding by. Now put a horn chord on the 4th beat of the last bar.
The technique of dictation varied, often considerably, with each work. Delius was never able to think of and retain more than a few bars at a time, and the most he ever dictated at a stretch was that new opening to the orchestral work, A Song of Summer. The composer dictated with great rapidity, and with 1 or 2 exceptions, the accompanying mood was one of frenzy and great physical activity. He could not keep still, but would wriggle about in his armchair, gesticulating wildly with his hands to a degree that would have been impossible in a more collected mood, until, bathed in perspiration, he could go on no longer. Then he would be carried away, exhausted. I now found myself in a very difficult position at Grez, for although the music was finished and my mission ended, Delius insisted on my staying on with him. Those 5 years had taught me that it is not wholesome and good for a youngster to live for long periods in an atmosphere of sickness and depression if he would keep his spirit, and the doctors had told me that, cared for as he was by his wife, there was no reason why Delius should not live for yet another 10 years. With the best intentions, I decided to leave Grez, but on the understanding that they were to send for me should anything serious occur.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Fenby, these are only a few words to thank you once more for letting us have Eric so long. The work he's done for me is absolutely unique, and it's almost a miracle that he came at all, and that he's worked so admirably. I want you to know how deeply we feel and appreciate what he has done. He's always been so steadfast and painstaking. And it seems so glorious that all these works that, but for him, would have remained mere sketches, are now actually brought to life and in the publisher's hands. We miss him very much indeed. Yours affectionately, Frederick Delius.
I'd not seen death before, and it had always been linked in my mind with doctor, priest, and tears. But when it came, none of these attendants was present. It seemed strange that of all my returns to Grez, this day should be the most beautiful. Great white oxen tramped leisurely across the fields, dragging the enormous top-heavy two-wheeled carts that the French use, and here and there little groups of men, brown with the hot sun, rested under the fruit trees now in full blossom, eating their bread and cheese, and drinking red wine from their bottles, whilst others in wide-brimmed straw hats bent their backs in the asparagus fields. My mind was not in tune with these good things of the earth, and I paid little heed to them. I entered the house and went straight away to Delius's room.
Eric! Eric, is that you? Eric!
Here I am, Delius.
Oh, lad, it's good to have you back. Where are you? Come here. Come here.
I went over to the bed and took the delicate hand he offered me and kissed his brow, for he was weeping like a child. With the days, the pyrethane which they gave Delius to ease the pain upset him so that he could not retain his food, and he grew weaker and could not sleep. Finally, after a night the unspeakable horror of which I shall never forget, the doctor paid a visit with his morphia syringe, and Delius was as if in a sound and noisy sleep. They had persuaded me to take some rest, and I had gone reluctantly and flung myself on a couch, telling them to wake me should he stir. At 4 o'clock that Sunday morning they roused me. I rushed into his bedroom. Delius, Delius, this is Eric. I took his cold hand and felt it grow colder in mine. And so our friendship came to an end, and with it the passing of a man, the likes of whom I know I shall never meet again. Youth is a strange time, and the stuff of youth is stranger. How glad I am that I wrote that letter.
Part of Delius's Appalachia, ending tonight's interval feature, A Late Lark. Eric Fenby was played by Arthur Bostrom, Frederick Delius by Christopher Greet, and Jelka Delius by Jean Alexander. A Late Lark was adapted and produced by Les Pratt.